Welcome to another Boring Topics State of the Channel video for 2025. I want to briefly touch on a couple stats from 2024, go over what's going on right now, and then mention a couple things we are planning on doing at some undefined point in the future, hopefully this year, but no guarantees. Unlike last year's video, this one is just me. Bill and David are both very much still part of the channel, but they are busy enough that I volunteered to handle this yearly update video myself. 2024 was another solid year for the channel, even though we fell far short of our goals for video releases, only getting out an update video, a single long video, and a handful of shorts. Total views were down 43% from 2023, which was largely as a result of the algorithm not really pushing the channel as it did in early 2023 when we got a massive burst of views in February and March. Still, 2024 saw steady and consistent growth. It just was much slower than 2023, which is to be expected. After all, with really just the one long video and a handful of shorts released, the algorithm was probably less than happy with the channel. Overall ad revenue was of course down as well, although our CPM is strong. The much lower view count over 2023 meant that total revenue was down 31% since 2023. To put that in perspective, one of us working at McDonald's and then splitting the paycheck 3 ways would still pay each one of the 3 of us quite a bit more than the channel currently brings in. 2024 was also a year where the amount of time each of us was able to dedicate to the channel was quite a bit down from what we were planning on, thanks to life getting in the way quite a bit. Personally, one of the biggest challenges for me was buying a house in the last half of 2024 and moving several hours away from where I had been living. This meant that for a number of months my entire research library was boxed up and basically inaccessible, and most of my weekends were busy with moving and house-related projects. I also had to get my office shed moved to the new location, set up, and connected to power. The whole process took me months to sort out, and my productivity absolutely went down the drain. Steve Jobs and Next Part 2 is still a long ways away from completion. I only have about 40% of the edit done, and it's proceeding very slowly. I should be able to devote more time to it going forward, but I'm also a bit tired of working on it, and to avoid burning out, I'm going to be spending some time working on editing Rise of Windows Part 3, which I just started recording this past week. I have no idea when either one will be done. I am well into editing Next Part 2, but Rise of Windows Part 3 is only half the length of Next Part 2, so we'll just have to see how it works out time-wise. The script for Steve Jobs and Next Part 2 has been available on the Substack since last summer, and the script for Rise of Windows Part 3 will also be posted there once the video is released. I'll probably try to release the script on the same day the video comes out, but that all depends on how the release date goes. The Sega script that David has been working on is complete, and Bill recorded the audio for it a couple weeks ago. It's an interesting look at Sega's late 1980s reboot of the Genesis in order to take on Nintendo, and I think it's going to be an excellent addition to the channel. Thanks to working one of the most demanding types of jobs out there, Bill has had basically no time to do anything outside of work this past year, so his own projects are mostly on hold right now. Additionally, given YouTube's tendency to strangle any video that goes into World War II or uses the name of the leader of Germany during that period, World War II can be a rather difficult subject to cover on here. Something we discovered when Bill's video on the Orzel was immediately throttled and restricted upon release. By the time we got it unrestricted, the damage was done and YouTube ensured that basically nobody saw it. All that is to say that Bill's original planned video subject that looked at the story of the 1980s con man who successfully fooled people into thinking that he had the actual diaries of the aforesaid leader of Germany is on indefinite hold. It just may not be worth him putting a lot of time into a video that has a high chance of being restricted. The handful of tech shorts that I was able to release last year were interesting tests of YouTube's algorithm. It looks like each short drives a spike in views for related videos as YouTube briefly pushes other related channel videos. Ultimately, though, it probably mostly just serves to let the algorithm know that the channel isn't dead or dormant, which is a good thing, but rather hard to quantify. YouTube recently increased the allowed short length to 3 minutes, which is interesting and possibly a bit easier to work with for me. It's hard for me to do something interesting in a minute, but a 3-minute video is about a page of script, and that should, hopefully, be long enough for me to cover the high points of an entire tech subject. I've been sporadically working on some 3-minute scripts right now, trying to get 5 scripts done. However, I don't even have one 3-minute script done yet, so the jury is still out on whether this will be a success or yet another one of my tech video projects that hangs around endlessly without seeing much progress. The 3-minute shorts also represent a potential opportunity to test the waters with different video subjects and see if any of them are worth pursuing. I love tech history, and obviously I am extremely excited to share that on the channel, but I also love studying Soviet economics. David loves studying Tolkien's mythos and Lord of the Rings, and Bill loves studying Greco-Roman history. All 3 of us love studying World War II, which, as previously mentioned, is a really tough market to target, as there is a lot of competition there from a number of excellent channels, plus, as previously mentioned, YouTube just makes it difficult for videos on World War II topics to be successful without them being restricted. The opportunity is there to broaden the channel scope more. We will just have to see if we can take advantage of it. Editing is our biggest bottleneck right now, which is the complete opposite of where things were at this time last year. This past year, we were able to upgrade David from an old Asus laptop to an upgraded 2017 27-inch iMac, and he's about to start learning the basics of DaVinci Resolve in order to handle audio editing and creating the rough edit of videos. The iMac is older, but its 64 gigabytes of RAM, 4 gigabyte video card, and quad-core i5 still handles editing 1080p video with ease, and should hopefully get us over the hump until we can upgrade him further. However, editing will probably remain a significant bottleneck indefinitely. It just takes a lot of time to edit these videos together, even though they are pretty basic so far as graphics and assets go. We have turned down a few sponsorship offers. I'm not going to say that you will never see a sponsored video, but it's probably not overly likely. The sponsorship would have to be for something that at least one of us personally believed in and supported, and would probably not be a digital product. And it assuredly would not be for a microtransaction-driven video game. The exception would be a game like Beamdog's Axis and Allies game, which is a game that all 3 of us enjoy, have occasionally played together for years, and have been playing the board game for quite a bit longer. Given its niche appeal and sadly low player count, however, I rather doubt Beamdog will be reaching out to us. There will be a Patreon at some point in the nearest future. The main and possibly only perk will be being able to listen to the audio of videos as soon as it's done. David getting up to speed on DaVinci Resolve will greatly help with this, as he'll hopefully be able to relatively quickly take over the bulk of the audio editing, both for his own projects as well as mine. There will probably be a $1 and a $5 tier, although the access and rewards will be the same for both. If anybody has any clever ideas for naming these tiers in a suitably boring manner, please feel free to leave a comment with your suggestion. Along with the Patreon, we will be launching a website at some point. And to be clear, this website will be very basic, probably hand-coded by me. My qualifications for this task are fairly simple. I'm the only one of the 3 of us to have ever taken a web programming class. Mind you, not only did I fail that web programming class, I also haven't done anything with HTML in quite a few years. So we will see what I can come up with. However, having a simple website will allow us to have a dedicated page for each video, probably with some affiliate links to the books we used for research, as well as any additional things that we might want to add. The Substack is going to stay my own project, and I have hopes of getting more writing done for it this year, hopefully branching out a bit into one of my other major interests besides tech history. Of course, I also had those hopes last year, so, take that with a grain of salt. I spend a great deal of time reading old tech magazines for research, and while many are available online, many are not. Additionally, I vastly prefer reading physical copies of research materials, as opposed to scanned versions, as I find it easier to retain what I read, as well as simply finding it more enjoyable. Plus, I find that I tend to stumble across things that spark further or different research avenues when I am physically studying something that doesn't really seem to happen as much when I'm reading a digital scan. Recently, I have gotten my hands on physical copies of InfoWorld for almost all of 1989 as well as 1990, which have been enormously useful for research, as well as just generally fun to peruse. As I work to build up my research library, any donations of computer magazines or other computer-related publications are extremely welcome. So long as I can afford it, I will happily pay shipping for anything of this nature that is looking for a good home, especially publications that aren't available online in any form. If you are interested in donating, please reach out via the channel's email address. I'd love to hear from you. The slow progress on further tech videos this year was partially driven by my having a lot less time and energy to devote to the channel, but another major factor was definitely the fact that a lot of my time and attention was going into writing a book covering IBM's PC and OS/2 history. The book has been a major passion project of mine. The 4 videos I have done on this subject really barely scratch the surface of the topic, and I have really enjoyed delving even more deeply into it. The book is split into 4 parts that cover 1975 through 1980, 1980 through 1985, 1985 through 1990, and 1990 through 2001, and currently has 81 chapters, plus 3 appendices, one of which focuses on reviewing the 3 main stories for what exactly happened when IBM met with Gary Kildall. Currently, the rough draft stands at 120,000 words and is nowhere near completion, as I keep finding more things to include. My original target length for the whole book was only 100,000 words or so I have no idea how long it's going to wind up being in the end. I may actually wind up making it 2 books, since it has a natural division at the end of part 2. The book is written exactly how I write my tech history scripts. It's just quite a bit longer, and I go down a lot more rabbit holes. For example, there is an entire chapter devoted to the System 23 Data Master, a computer which turned out to have some surprising connections to not only the IBM PC, but also Gary Kildall. I won't even try to give a time frame for when the book will be released, but I will give occasional updates as I hit new milestones. There is a decent amount of stuff in the pipeline, but as always, videos get done when they get done. From a tech history perspective, I have 2 other scripts that I wrote in 2024 that are mostly completed. One is an overview of PDAs of 1997, and the other focuses on a specific Windows CE PDA model. Right now, they are waiting for me to have the time to finish evaluating the software, as well as figure out a workable approach to grab screenshots. Windows CE 1.0 in particular is a royal pain to try to get screenshots from, but I am determined to get proper ones from it. This is requiring me to either finish working on a G3 PowerBook that can then run soft Windows 95, or get an ancient AST Windows 95 desktop running that I forgot I had and hasn't been turned on in probably almost 20 years. These scripts may hit the Substack well before they get turned into videos. We will just have to see how things go. David has an almost done script about the penultimate chapter of The Lord of the Rings. If things go well with the previously mentioned videos, his video may come out in Q4 of this year. I think that pretty much wraps up this video. As always, thanks for watching and for supporting this little corner of YouTube. You all are incredibly patient with how slow the channel is to release new videos, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. A special big thanks goes out to those who have donated to the channel through Buy Me a Coffee this past year. Your contributions are incredibly appreciated and were very encouraging. Here is to another great year. Hopefully, a year with at least a couple more long-form releases than last year. And now, as a special bonus, and to prove that I am working on it and I have made a lot of progress, here is a little teaser, the first 10 minutes of Steve Jobs and Next Part 2. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to another boring topic and the long-delayed conclusion to Next's story. I made multiple attempts to get this story scripted, but I really struggled to find the right thread to follow. It would be fairly easy, even for someone as long-winded as I tend to be, to make this a 10-minute video that basically boiled down to Next floundered as a software-only company for several years, and then Steve Jobs convinced Apple to buy the whole company. Next Step OS became the basis for Mac OS X, and Next itself was never really spoken of again, as Jobs and Apple began their long climb back to cultural domination. And in many ways, this would be substantially accurate. Next's direct story really does basically end with Apple's purchase of it in late 1996. Steve Jobs' favorite biographer, Walter Isaacson, gives Next very little space in his biography of Jobs. And the two primary books on Next itself, I Failed and Steve Jobs and the Next Big Thing, are really solely concerned with events prior to Next's abandonment of its hardware side. I Failed basically stops right as Next's hardware division was about to be sold to Canon at the end of 1993, and since Steve Jobs and the Next Big Thing was published in 1993, it only carries the story up to basically that same point as well. And yet, there is so much more to the story. The rest of Next's story is also the story of Apple's rebirth, of Steve Jobs' rehabilitation as a visionary CEO, and of the Macintosh operating system finally making the transition to a modern OS after multiple high-profile and expensive failures. It's the story of an operating system that quietly underpins multiple types of devices today, ranging from mobile to set-top boxes, and the technology that did so much to give us the modern computing world. It's a complicated, convoluted, and complex story that I am going to try to do justice to the best of my ability. But this story also encompasses Apple's dire straits in the 1990s, and the multiple strenuous efforts it made to reverse the decline and get back on its feet, both on hardware and software. This story is also about the roads not taken, the roads wrongly taken, and in the end, the road correctly taken, and where that road eventually took Apple and Steve Jobs. So we are going to be covering a lot of ground here, and I'm going to be going off on a lot of tangents as I try to tie everything together in the end. I do promise to properly pronounce Mac OS X as Mac OS X this time, proving that I do actually pay attention to the feedback and constructive criticism that I receive, although I will, of course, probably mispronounce at least a word or two somewhere in this video. So join me as we journey back to the early 1990s and a flailing computer company that is rapidly hemorrhaging cash, led by a CEO whose vastly diminished personal wealth is shrinking ever more every day, as he not only struggles to keep his imploding computer company afloat, but also fights to keep a completely separate company from going under. Pixar was wrestling with the production of the first computer-animated feature film, and was having a brutally difficult time sorting out not only story issues that forced a temporary halt in production, and not only the teething problems that came with making a film on the cutting edge of technology, but also financial issues. Put simply, Jobs had two flailing companies making demands on him and what was left of his Apple-derived fortune. Matters came to a head in 1993, not a very good year for Steve Jobs, although in fairness, the previous 8 years had also been pretty up and down. As a brief recap, in 1985, Jobs had attempted to regain control of Apple from the man he had personally hired to help run it, John Sculley. The coup attempt had failed, and Jobs had been relegated to an honorary role that carried no authority or responsibilities. After going through the enormous turmoil and near-emotional collapse that this had caused in himself, Jobs decided to start a new computer company that would create the next major computer family, running a cutting-edge new operating system whose success would validate to everyone that Apple had backed the wrong horse in Sculley. After leaving Apple, Jobs had moved quickly to sever his remaining ties to the company he had co-founded. On March 15, 1986, he completed selling off all but a single share of his Apple stock, which he held on to so he could still receive Apple's stockholder reports and appear at shareholder meetings, should he so choose. I also personally suspect that Jobs could not bring himself to completely cut all ties to the company that had been his life, and thus would always have found some excuse to retain this single share. Jobs had started with 6.5 million shares, representing 11.3% of the total and making him Apple's largest single shareholder. This massive sell-off that he had begun on July 22, 1985, by letting the SEC know that he planned to sell off a total of 100,000 shares, had been a rather pointed signal to the rest of the world that Apple's former golden boy did not have any confidence in Apple's continued longevity. But this rather petty way of backhanding Apple had badly backfired, costing Jobs money that he badly needed by the 1990s. In spite of Apple's struggles and the moribund state they had fallen into by the early 1990s, the stock was still considerably up from when Jobs had sold it, a fact that had cost him tens of millions of dollars. Specifics are hard to figure out exactly, but using Yahoo's stock history, in 1985 it looks like Apple stock traded in an adjusted range from 9 to 13 cents or so, and in 1993 ranged from 20 to 53 cents, meaning that even in the worst case scenario, he could have doubled his money, and best case quadrupled it, since Apple had also done a 2-for-1 stock split in 1987. Note that this is the adjusted price based on the current amount of Apple stock and normalized for stock splits and adjustments since then. So the actual specific price was considerably higher back then, with the unadjusted prices in 1985 ranging from $29.01 in January to $22 in December. In 1993, the stock price started the year at $59.51 in January and ended the year at $29.25. Using the adjusted stock prices allows you to do a fairly direct comparison between Apple stock prices then and their stock prices now that would not otherwise be possible. In the words of an article I found that explained this, historical stock prices must be transformed so that this data is indicative of the total return that would have been achieved from holding a particular stock over a particular period of time. The transformation must create a series that reflects the dividends, mergers, spin-offs, splits, and various other events that impact the stock's total return. I'll link to an article that tries to explain it better, as well as another one that shows Apple's adjusted and non-adjusted historical stock prices. Using Apple's adjusted stock price makes sense in the context of comparing 1985 and 1993. However, when we start talking about potential Apple buyout offers, I will be using the non-adjusted stock price. The reason for this is that if I use the adjusted price, discussing acquisition negotiations whose price was based around the then current stock price of Apple won't make sense. Anyhow, Jobs' decision to dump his Apple stock in 1985 had cost him an enormous amount of money. His actions had cost him tens of millions of potential dollars, strictly viewed in the context of the early 1990s. 11.3% of Apple today would be worth considerably more, which was money that he sorely needed, as Next was badly floundering. From the start, Next's line of expensive computers had mostly been praised for their innovation, particularly in software, yet had found few buyers and little to no success. This was in spite of the powerful and advanced features that Next computers and the Next Step operating system offered to its users. Those that could afford one, or worked for a company that provided one to its employees, received the benefit of a fairly powerful system, albeit one with some poor design choices such as the infamous magneto-optical drive, paired with an operating system that was object-oriented and years ahead of its time in any number of areas, especially including its advanced networking abilities. The tiny install base of Next systems genuinely had an impact on the computing landscape, vastly out of proportion to their minuscule market share. For example, the pioneering shooter Doom was programmed on a Next system, with id Software finding its development tools so significantly superior to DOS-based ones that id actually bought a number of Next machines for their developers, who put them to work creating both Doom 2 and Quake. According to John Carmack, over the entire course of Doom and Quake 1's development, we probably spent $100,000 on Next computers, which he felt was an excellent price for the value they got out of them. Even more consequently, the World Wide Web was also created on a sleek, black Next machine. Tim Berners-Lee used his Next computer at CERN to not only create the first web browser, but also to create and run the world's first web server that hosted the world's first web address and the website located there. When the 2012 a few Next computers had been sold, the giant, fully automated factory that made the computers had built and sold fewer than 50,000 machines since 1988. And fewer Next machines were being sold year by year, with even Apple's shrinking numbers far outstripping Next's. As Windows exploded in popularity and PCs flew off the shelves in ever greater numbers, a superior operating system and good hardware specs only went so far.